Okay, it's 12:03. Let's get our session started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Washington, D.C. Section ITE February Virtual Technical Session. My name is Lily Liang. I'm the Baltimore Area Director of WDC Site and Chief for Traffic Engineering Design Division from M.SHA. I will host today's presentation. Aidan Greenstein, the WDC Site President, will assist me in case I overlook anything. WDC site has received several Project of the Year submissions for our last annual meeting, and we would like to share 4 amazing presentations through today and tomorrow's Lunch and Learn. Just a few housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded for future reference. Please mute yourself to ensure the best sound quality. Please follow us on LinkedIn. I will put the link in the chat box. At the end of each presentation, we will have the Q&A session. You can either type your question into chat anytime, or you can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button. I will call your name and you can unmute to ask the question. After attending both sessions, you will receive an instruction of how to get the PDH via email. Now let's start the first presentation, DC Near Northwest 3 Safety and Mobility Study by Kelsey Bridges and Emma Blodin. Kelsey is a transportation planner with DDOT and has been with the agency for almost 5 years. Her work ranges from small planning studies, development review, public space engagement, and managing the Transportation Alternatives Program. Prior to DDOT, she worked in Chicago on various projects through the NEPA and long-range planning processes. She is from the Midwest originally and enjoys soccer and outdoor dining. Emma is a transportation planner in DDOT's neighborhood planning branch. In addition to working on development review and public space activation, she manages DDOT's Arts in Right-of-Way program. Prior to joining DDOT, Emma's work focused on bicycle and pedestrian safety. Now welcome Kelsey and Emma.
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm Emma, and this is Kelsey.
Hello. One moment. Yeah, so we're here to talk to you today about the Near Northwest 3 Safety and Mobility Study. It's the first of its brand and one that we wrapped up at the end of July in 2021. Today we'll talk about, we had an overview of who we are. You got that down, about the Safety and Mobility Study Program. Our first study, which was called the Near Northwest 3 Safety and Mobility Study, how we came up with the project selection, safety treatments, and implementation after the project, because there's been a lot of value to that component. We worked on this with Kittleson, Public Engagement Associates, and Kimley Horn. So what is the Safety and Mobility Study? It's essentially looking at, DDOT had a livability study program, which looked at robust safety improvements by neighborhood. It considered, sometimes it include, okay, sorry, I thought there was maybe a mute issue or something along those lines. They focused on looking at neighborhood safety improvements, sometimes corridor wide, and frequently included things that would need to have large infrastructure changes to be implemented. And those projects would have kind of robust designs that needed to be taken to the next round to be for feasibility, which created a handoff problem internally in terms of like working with the community to come up with a design that may not be something that we can quickly implement in a reasonable time frame. So the safety and mobility study concept was essentially identified to address those the slow process to implement some of the much needed safety improvements that came out of those studies. So it focused on tactical improvements that we can essentially implement within 1 to 3 years. It focused a lot on curb extensions and intersection design specifically, and it looked less at major corridors where we have some other agency initiatives that can address that, and looked more at a neighborhood level. So the expected outcomes of the study, the safety and mobility study, were essentially to focus on those short-term quick build projects. We are identifying and looking at 40 intersections within the study that we believe can be accomplished within 3 years. Install 10 of those projects during the study, and install art in 5 of the 10 immediate installations. And what you see at the bottom here are a lot of the kind of like what you may call bread and butter of pedestrian safety. We have the crosswalks, curb extensions, left turn hardening, as well as a little additional flair with the painted curb extensions. So the Near Northwest 3 study, this was the study area that we looked at for this initial study. It actually, as you'll see, has a very large population that commutes in ways other than a single occupancy vehicle. You can see the breakdown of that distribution at the bottom of this slide. It extends, it has a huge portion of the district's population. It includes 6 local ANCs, which is kind of like our smaller bodies that kind of assist with neighborhood communication with DDOT and other entities, other government entities. It goes all the way down to the convention center to the south. It's between 2 major corridors, Georgia Avenue and 16th Street, with Mount Pleasant a little to the northwest. So it's a very diverse, dense area. And so that was something that in order to, we had to try and look at making sure that we're incorporating things throughout the corridor that can be beneficial to a community that does, you know, like compared to the rest of the district, has a pretty large, like walking public transit cycling community. We did this through, we did gathered information to come up with a preliminary assessment, like what has been asked in the past that maybe we had not delivered on, what is being asked now, looking at past crash data, things of that nature. We had, then we evaluated those concepts, those locations, and started looking at our toolkit to see what locations made the most sense, that we could have a larger impact. Then we shared those with the community, revised them, and then essentially we had ended the project with 40 different design plans. The public engagement process, this was DDOT's first time incorporating an all Spanish component as well. We had all of our meetings in English and Spanish, and our materials as well. We distributed throughout the corridor, and definitely it was a good experience in terms of learning how to reach a community that although we've always have access options, something that was more deliberate based on the community we were working with.
If you click the arrow button.
Sorry.
So I'm going to go through kind of how we selected those 40 locations for treatments. So this is the process here. We began with every intersection in the study. We focused on intersections because that is where there's the most conflict points. And that's really where these tactical quick build recommendations that we will have do the most good. So we started with every intersection, which is about 400 intersections in that study area. We then removed the intersections on major streets. Like Kelsey said, some of these already have DDOT projects, but also a lot of them, the tactical projects, we can't install them, or they don't address the safety concerns at those intersections. This was kind of one of the hardest things with the scope is, really focus knowing where we can do the good with these tactical improvements and where we acknowledge that these are not going to increase safety, especially for pedestrians and cyclists. So after we removed those intersections, we incorporated the community feedback. This was through a variety of means. We looked at all the ANC resolutions that have previously been put through and signed, asking for traffic calming, asking for a variety of safety improvements. We looked at what previous plans and studies have said about this study area. We have a Vision Zero interactive map where folks are able to identify safety concerns on a interactive map and say, what the issue is, and then kind of provide more detail. We also, at our public meetings, we did polling to see where folks would like us to prioritize our safety improvements, if they wanted them within distance of schools, parks, commercial areas, that sort of thing. And then we also had our own interactive map where we encouraged the public to identify, their safety concerns and things that they would like us to address through this study. And then in addition to the community feedback, we looked at the data piece of it. So we looked at crashes, we looked at traffic volumes and capacity, where are roads really under capacity when, that kind of attributes to higher speeding and, where things that we can slow down. We looked at intersection controls, how far pedestrians have to cross, are there exclusive turn lanes, and then overall looking at intersection geometry, which, as you all know, DC has a lot of wonky intersections. And then we came up with a list of about 100 intersections that rose to the top there, and we did our own suitability screening. We looked to see if these intersections have been recently approved, if there are, locations where there are no curb ramps where we could do more good, rush hour restrictions, bus lanes, and that sort of thing. The rush hour restrictions and bus lanes, both of those use the curb lane at least part of the time. And so those are places where we couldn't really install curb extensions or reduce that width for pedestrians to cross. So after that, we had a list of 40 intersections, and we started working through the design of the safety treatments. And so the concept development, I'll walk through 4 or 5 different things that we kind of looked at for every intersection. The first is our on-street parking standards. So DDOT's design and engineering manual has a 25-foot buffer from the edge of the crosswalk to the beginning of on-street parking to help with visibility. So that should always be no parking. It isn't always signed that way. And so what we looked at for most intersections is actually signing that space and then adding a curb extension there to, hash it out and add flex posts to make sure that folks aren't parking there or using that space as loading. We also looked at curb extensions where we could. So, pulling that curve out, bringing the curb radii to, again, DDOT standards. So wherever we could get a 15-foot curb radii, we added it. And then tightening up and teeing up intersections. This is definitely, we have some corridors that are all on angles, and so most of their intersections are not at a T at a 90 degree, and so we focused on teeing those up as much as we could. And then just increasing the visibility of pedestrians and cyclists. So where we had bike lanes crossing, we wanted to make sure we were adding the green stripes through it. We, where we could reduce the width of a pedestrian crossing, we did. Where we could add high visibility, we did. And then lastly, we added we looked where we could add left turn hardening to, again, slow down those vehicles making turns so that they can see the pedestrians as they're coming on.
Implementation. So as I noted, we implemented 10 projects towards the end of the study. So essentially we went from our concept design to implementation within like 2 to 3 months. Obviously there was a lot of internal work to make sure we had that teed up so that we could hand off the designs to be installed, but it essentially helped bridge that gap of DDOT making plans but not always implementing. And these projects was one of the things that we said to folks too that might not have been as excited about a tactical curb extension versus a concrete or a built out with a curb extension is like, this gets the safety element in now. And when we come back through with a streetscape or even just general paving, it's something that we can make more permanent. So these are, like, it's how can we get the safety elements in now and have the same benefit, and maybe some of the visual concerns could be addressed later or through art. So with those designs, we put in the 10, and 5 of them did have art. We also, for the remaining 30 designs, we had these cut sheets that you can see an example of to the right that show, this one's Berry and 10th, which shows tactical traffic circle, and a comment that someone had that was very excited about incorporating the traffic circle. But these cut sheets also provide us and anyone looking at this kind of like, this is where this design is at. Most of the projects that we did not require any further notice in order to be installed. For example, they're not removing parking or changing traffic operations, but some of them did. And we included in here on these cut sheets why an intersection was included, what safety elements were essentially added to, whether it's like minimized crossing distances or increase visibility. We also included like where this would be within the timeline, whether this was a project that would require more public engagement or something along those lines. And yeah, and at the bottom, the last thing was like, will this go through some familiar, like, do we need additional internal direction? Do we need to reach back out to the community or other sister agencies? So this was something that came out of the study that anyone could look to and essentially pull out if they wanted to as a standalone element, which also had value. And as I mentioned, the art, one of the criticisms of tactical installations the district gets is that they frequently get run over and aren't maintained very well, and they're just not visually appealing. The art we have had other locations in the district where we have incorporated art. This is the first project that has been part of a larger study. And it really, whether we're talking to the artist or reading comments from the community, it really made people feel a new association with the space. And this wasn't just something that was no longer not a parking space or place I can put my car. It became a neighborhood, like icon or something that, like that you can walk by and it's viewed as public space in a different way. So we included art that we tried to reference the community and things, the history of the space. The top element with the zipper, this piece celebrates Alma Thomas, a world-renowned artist who lived just a few houses away, who now has been in so many different museums and is getting and is having a moment, if you will, in lots of different areas. So that this work, she lived nearby, and this is like placemaking in terms of like recognizing the history in this neighborhood that has seen a lot of change. The location at the bottom is 8th and V Street, which is near 930 Club and U Street. And it has these wonderful jazz musicians and celebrates a lot of that musical history within the corridor, and also provides these the safety elements in a large intersection in this case. Post-study, we saw, so I said we finished the study implementing 10. One of the great things is that the study included creating not just the cut sheets, but these plans that you can see at the bottom that we essentially can hand off to our contractors to install. It's a standalone document. It has, like the number of material, it has like what the materials are, the essentially all of the dimensions that are needed, and we can pass this off and have someone quickly install it. And because of that, and this is true, and I think in lots of governments, is that towards the end of the fiscal year, you start looking at what money is left and what projects you can reassign. And because we had ready to go projects, we were able to essentially within a month get 6 additional locations implemented. And some of them also even incorporated art. But it essentially, this is, like something that we didn't necessarily know would be as valuable as we were able to quickly take advantage of something and have plans to install, and essentially almost double the amount of installations we had promised at the end of the study. And we also found benefit is that is that this is something that can easily be passed off to our stormwater team that does LID or our engineering team. And this can be, even if they're not putting in something tactical, they can incorporate the design either into something that is more permanent and look at essentially what would need to be done. But this included like turning radii and things like that made a pass off much easier. And actually lots of folks were like, this is great. We can actually use this to do something more robust. You've gone through the steps already, but it also makes it easier for us to, as we do implement more projects, we can also, or work through this list of 24, we can still also put them in as tactical as designed. So that was something that was really beneficial to the project and the safety and mobility study model that we see as a benefit moving forward. I also wanted to show a picture. As I had mentioned before, a lot of these projects were simple, like tactical intersections. We did leave room for a few locations that would have what we called complex intersection designs. So this has a lot of paint and a lot of markers on it because it is a large intersection that could be narrowed. But this location like doesn't really remove any existing vehicle parking. It's kind of amazing the amount of like what we're able to do here without necessarily changing the way the intersection works. And so we have a few I want to say like 5 projects that would fall into this complex intersection that maybe do need a little internal work. We definitely want to reach out to the community again before we implement this, because it would visually appear like a big change, even if what we're proposing doesn't automatically drastically change the existing conditions at the location. And one of the other things that the agency is learning is how to be a little more transparent with our projects. It is common for projects to be lost in the ether or a project website domain to be taken over. This is on a DDOT, is a DDOT website. It's attached to us, and we are also incorporating a project tracking element. So not only can you go onto the website and see all of the designs, if you have a question or you're wanting to bring it up, print one of them out or all of them, you can also look at this interactive map we have that shows what projects have been implemented, when the remaining ones are expected to be implemented. And if you like live on a special block and you have a super interest in a project, you can also look at that specific component. So this is something, and if you click on this, each one of these dots, it also has the information, a lot of that information that were on those cut sheets about timing and NOI and why this location was selected. So this is something that we're hoping will also help our engagement team as well, when they're trying to communicate with the public about expectations for delivery as well. And that is our entire presentation.
Thank you, Kelsey and Emma. So let's see how many questions we get here. Due to time constraint, maybe we only have time for 1 or 2 questions. So Joy C. Monica, she asks, can you share the location online where the sheets for all 40 of the projects are available? So I think Joyce may be mentioned that the screen you are showing here, which is the interactive map. If you can share the link into the box, that will be great. You are muted.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was actually asking about those sheets where it had listed kind of something at the bottom about like what follow-up was going to happen. It wasn't clear to me if that had happened for all 40 or just the ones that had not been completed yet. And if those were created for all 40, where are they located?
Okay, thank you. Actually, I do have a question. For those artwork on the pavement, those looks very creative and attractive. But my question is related to the MUTCD. I'm not sure whether it can be considered as the pavement marking or it's just the artwork. Do you have any input?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna have Kelsey address the first the question about the cut sheets, and then I'll talk MUTCD.
We're still waiting for our final report to be approved and released, and it does include all of the 40 cut sheets, which as you noted by looking at our website aren't there at this time. So you can see the draft locations, and once we release the report, you'll that will include not only the more robust design sheets, but the cut sheets, which are the simplified information with the information at the bottom.
So the artwork in the curb extensions. So the reason we're able to do this, whereas MUTCD would say you cannot put murals and crosswalks and that sort of thing, is because this curb extension space is retired from the roadway. While it is still asphalt roadway, it is no longer part of the vehicle cartway, and it's no longer part of the roadway that people use for traffic. And so what happens in that space is no longer subject to the MUTCD. And we have been talking with FHWA, and we didn't want this. Well, there's no way for us to do it in the secret anyways, because we have USDOT literally across the street. And so we talked with them through the process, and we're also initiating research to see what, if any, effect this does have on traffic, these murals and the curb extensions. We, I think, anecdotally felt like it made the curb extensions more visible than if there was nothing in it, if it was just hashed out roadway space. And so we're going to be comparing tactical curb extensions to tactical curb extensions with art in them, to see what the difference is as far as yielding rates and speed and that sort of thing.
Thank you very much. Considering the time, we have to move forward. If our attendees have other questions to ask, feel free to reach me for Kelsey and Emma's contact information so we can communicate offline. Now let's move to the second presentation, which is the Montgomery County Complete Streets Design Guide by Stephen Eldridge and Andrew Bossy. Andrew is a senior engineer and a planner with the transportation policy team at the Montgomery County Department of Transportation. With 25 years of experience and a background in traffic design, operations, and safety, as well as special events and emergency management. For the past decade, he has focused on policy, master planning, capital projects, development review, run-on sentences, and a breadth of miscellaneous efforts that do not quite fit anywhere else. He has been a member of ITE since the early 2000s, when he served among the leadership for Penn State student ITE chapter. Steve is a transportation engineer planner with 36 years experience in transportation planning and traffic engineering. He works in the countywide planning and policy division, and he is in charge of highway planning, CIP, transportation agency coordination, and transportation mandatory referrals. Prior to joining Montgomery Planning, Steve worked in the private sector for most of his career, focusing on corridor planning, access management, highway safety, traffic operations, and signal design. He has been a proud member of IT since 1987. Now I will turn the time over to Steve.
Great, thank you. And I just want to check to make sure you can hear me well,
Yes.
because I'm calling in from my
Yes.
phone. Okay, thank you. So thank you for coming today. We're really excited to give you this presentation about the Complete Streets Design Guide. This was a joint project between Montgomery Planning and Montgomery County DOT. And it was actually the first such effort together. Why? Montgomery County DOT is part of the executive branch of government, reports to the county executive, and the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission is a legislative branch of government and reports to the county council. So we don't always historically see eye to eye, but this was a great success working together. What you'll notice in the chat, Andrew's posted a link to the planning webpage for the Complete Streets Design Guide. And actually, this document is hosted on both the planning department's website and DOT's website as well. Our consultants for this project were Tool Design and Arcane K, who assisted all our agencies in preparing this document. And we also had some great help from the original project managers, which included John Thomas, who is now at Loudoun County, and Dave Ansbacher, who still works in the planning department. Next slide, please. So today we're gonna take you through, sort of the background of the guide, the process for developing it, and then we're gonna give you an overview of the contents of the guide. Most of that overview will be done by Andrew, and we'll talk about where we are in the process, and then we're happy to take any questions. Next slide. So we start off with
Sorry, I cannot hear
complete
you.
streets are roadways that are designed and operated to provide safe, accessible, and healthy travel for all users of the roadway system, including pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, and motorists. On a complete street, it is intuitive and safe to cross the street, walk to shops, and bicycle to school. And the guidelines developed really have been intended to provide a one-stop reference for on Montgomery County streets. A big motivation for this is the county's Vision Zero goal to eliminate traffic fatalities and serious injuries and Montgomery County adopted a Vision Zero resolution in 2016, making it one of the first counties in the nation to do so. And certainly Vision Zero is an approach to road safety that uses design, education, and enforcement to eliminate traffic deaths and serious injuries. And we try to provide that in that context within this guide. So the guidelines really are intended to supplement county master plans and design standards, and will guide the design of capital improvements and development projects. And it really shows up in many places within our county, but it was critical that we do this coordinated as two agencies together. The guide is very technical, and there are a lot of standards that we'll go through real briefly. but it's packaged in a very brief 300-page document. Next slide. So for the process, we started this project about 2 years ago, and we conducted a very detailed review process internally. We worked within our agencies. We did have some focus groups, and we worked very carefully to pull together some of the technical details. And where we are now, next slide. We're now at the point lines which have been done by Montgomery County Planning Board laws into county code. And we're working through that with the council. We have a bunch of several codes to modify, including the road code, the subdivision of land code, and the zoning code. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so throughout the project, there's been extensive involvement and significant involvement from both the planning department, county DOT, as well as other agencies, including the Department of Permitting Services. And there was also some initial public feedback, including a developer open house. And we have been engaged with the State Highway Administration throughout because they were simultaneously developing their own context-driven road design approach to apply statewide. Next slide. So we're going to take you through the chapters of the document. There are 9 chapters. I'm going to take you through, I think, the first couple, and then Andrew's going to take the rest of the way. So the vision, this really presents the vision for this chapter, which is to develop guidelines to help transform streets into great places that are equitably shared among diverse communities, following the 3 principles of safety, sustainability, and vitality. Montgomery County has over 1,000 lane miles of streets. And while this guide is intended primarily for county roads, we're hoping that this is really sort of the vision of what we'd like to see on state highways as well. It's critical that safety for all people is definitely a key behind this plan. Next slide, please. Chapter 2 presents new street types that will be used to establish design priorities and parameters for individual streets. And one thing I want to note is that in Montgomery County, we've had street classification since 1931, probably one of the few counties to implement their own classification system. And, you know, I think what we realized is we kept trying to change it as more advances happened, but we realized with complete streets, we really needed to rethink our street types entirely. So these street types focus on the types of streets that we want to be building moving forward, and they're largely defined by land use and urban form, as well as transportation function. And, you know, so they're going to vary a lot more because you know, you may have an arterial along an entire, going through an entire county, but it changes from rural to suburban to town center to different forms of urbanization. That's what we wanted to reflect that. So there are 12 street types that we've developed for the county, and you will notice that there's some commonality between the names. They reflect several major land use contexts: downtowns, town centers, neighborhoods, and country areas. And what's not listed there is suburban, which are largely the areas that are not highlighted. Next slide, please. Each street type in the guide has a 6-page spread that starts off looking like this. This is an example of the first street type, downtown boulevards. These are the main streets you would find in some central business districts. In Montgomery County, that would be Bethesda, Silver Spring, Wheaton, and White Flint. They typically have BRT routes planned along them and have frequent transit service and high pedestrian and bicycle activity. Next slide, please. The 3rd and 4th pages for each street type provide some detailed design parameters, and it's a little difficult to see here, but Andrew's going to provide, I think, a much better overview of some of the technical details. But the idea is that you can turn to this and get all of the technical information you need about what are the required elements along each street type. The remainder of the information here address the widths of various items in the cross-section and their default widths and minimum widths and priorities. And then the priority is really important. And Andrew will talk about this in terms of how you actually make everything fit, because fitting all these components into a master plan right away, it isn't always possible. And so there has to be some kind of priority system. The last of the pages for each street type is a list of street design features and identifies whether they're required, recommended, optional, not permitted, or not applicable. And I did want to mention the current draft. You may see red pages here and there, and that's because the document, while approved, is still in a draft form until we pass through a county council review and incorporate the changes in the county code. And at that point, a final version will be produced. In addition to core street types, there are also more rare or unusual street types that the guide will touch on briefly. Many of these are already covered in county code. And so we have not found alley designs to be high level detail, and our experience with shared streets, known as WUNRs, is still limited. But and there are two types of rustic roads that are currently used in Montgomery County. And those are, they're pretty much rural streets that sort of have, they're sort of a hands-off approach, trying to maintain the rural rustic character of those roads. But those are, I guess, incorporated by reference within our document. And I think in future versions, we might tackle the shared street issue a little bit more. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, who is going to take us through, a deeper dive in some of the design details. Andrew.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Bossy with the Montgomery County Department of Transportation. I'm about to talk about a whole lot of zones. First, there are two overarching zones. There's the active zone behind the curb and the street zone within the curb. Each of these includes smaller zones within them that I'll dive further into in the next couple slides. Two things I'll call out here on this page are the bikeways, which are at the left, shown behind the curb in the active zone, and they're buffered on both sides from street traffic as well as pedestrians. The triptych graphic on the right also shows that bikes might share with pedestrians on a side path, as in the middle image, or they might be retrofitted into the street zone, which was within the curb-to-curb street area, as in the bottom image. I'm waiting for my own slides to advance. There we go. Now to dive into those zones, Chapter 3 focuses on the active zone, which includes elements, again, between the curb and the property line. On the outside, the maintenance buffer and frontage zone, they're on the outside up against the right-of-way line. Basically, they allow for the ease of maintaining the adjacent sidewalk. They can also serve as amenity spaces for things like outdoor cafe seating. Where there is constrained right-of-way, they're often among the first areas to be cut, though a 2-foot maintenance buffer is required if there's a building or other structure along the property line. The sidewalk or side path area is intended to be completely clear, meaning no signs, poles, or inaccessible grates. It's supposed to be as straight as can be, and pavement must comply with ADA requirements. These clear zones have been our standard for many years now, but this is mostly just making them even bigger, particularly in the downtown and town center areas. Next, there's the pedestrian bicycle buffer, bike buffer, and then there's the bike lanes. The vision is for bike lanes to be part of the active zone, improving their separation from motor vehicles as well as pedestrians. And that buffer, separating the bikeway from the pedestrian, the sidewalk and side path, is that it might provide street side furniture, depending on the width, that could have trees, benches, bike racks, could be where dockless vehicles are parked. Again, it's sort of a versatile interface between bikes and pedestrians. The street buffer zone is the separation between bikes and motor vehicles. That's where you usually find landscaping in particular. You'll have poles, signs, parking meters in there. Might be used for stormwater management and other green streets efforts, including, again, trees. Open section streets might use the street buffer for graded drainage ditches. It's basically a street buffer is envisioned to be, again, really versatile area that knits together the street zone and the active zone. Chapter 3 also includes information on signing, transit stops, driveways, street lighting, and maintenance responsibilities. Something I'm going to call out is that the driveways, they're expected to be at sidewalk grade, which means that as a pedestrian, you have much less going down and up and down and up at every driveway. You just stay at grade. And that also asserts that pedestrians have the right of way, and we We've been pushing for this in urban areas in particular and bike ped priority areas for, again, a couple of years now. This is applying that countywide. Chapter 4 focuses on the street zone. This is the vehicular area between the curbs. This area is comprised of 3 other smaller zones within it. That's the curbside zone, which has stuff like parking, loading, and parklets. It might also include retrofitted bikeways. There's the travelway zone and median zone, which includes the travel lanes, transit lanes, and median, aptly named. And the chapter also includes guidance on car share and electric vehicle parking, mobile food vending, micromobility corrals, utilities, network connectivity. Network connectivity is planning level guidance, not quite as engineering as a lot of the manual gets into, but it basically says we want streets to link up to other streets to provide redundancy, but also to get away from dead-end streets, especially those that hinder pedestrian and bicycle movement across them. The guide includes widths for each street feature, including travel lanes, as you can see on the screen here. The current road code calls for narrower lanes only in downtown areas, and we're looking to take this even further, perhaps most noticeable also in the town center and neighborhood areas. This is an important part of both slowing traffic as well as reducing crossing distances for pedestrians. Our guide does call out that there may be reasons why these lane widths might need to be wider, such as if there's a high volume of large vehicles like buses or major truck routes. And another thing to keep in mind is along horizontal curves where you have your effective width can shrink and you need to widen your envelope or widen your lane slightly to account for a vehicle's envelope as it goes around the curve. With a minimum street width of 21 feet, this fits within fire access requirements. This also allows for fire access needs along 1-lane streets, which require 12-foot lane widths and periodic 8-foot emergency lane access areas. While we have guidance on 2-way center left turn lanes, this makes it clear that these really aren't a preferable treatment and should be used only in limited circumstances. Before I get to the next chapter on bikeways, I want to divert briefly to prioritization. As you may recall, Steve had just mentioned this about how we have prioritization for each street type and each street feature. When there isn't enough right-of-way to fit everything in, that priority provides guidance on how to go about reducing things. So each of those street features has a default width that we would start with. And then as we need to shrink things down, there's also a minimum width that we can start shrinking things down toward. You'll see that maintenance buffers, medians, on-street parking are often the first to be reduced, and street buffers, sidewalks, side paths, bikeways are upheld across nearly every street type. If you narrow things down to their minimums and you still need more space, cutting things not included in master plans may now be an option. In my piloting this since about early 2020, I've found that this often means cutting parking in order to avoid cutting down higher priority elements like the stuff in the active zone. Of course, if a master plan calls for something, the expectation is that it cannot be cut. It needs to be provided at some point over the lifetime of that master plan. That is an example of where acquiring additional right-of-way may then become necessary, though I've not found this to be necessary in the vast majority of cases that I have piloted this on. Chapter 5, so following the active zone and the street zone is Chapter 5, which focuses specifically on bikeways. This largely pulls directly from our bicycle master plan, which was completed in 2018. It's a fantastic plan. I urge everyone to take a look at that, and maybe I'll try to remember to put a link in chat when I finish speaking here. It takes the bike master plan a step further by providing detailed design parameters for each bikeway type and establishing default bikeways for each street type. And also establishing that the vision that bikeways should be primarily located in the active zone, not in the street zone. The bicycle master plan set a vision for a network of bikeways that, to sum it up briefly, is a kind of network you'd feel comfortable letting your kids ride on. I'm an extremely weak bike rider myself, and I see it as a network that I'd feel comfortable riding on. And this chapter also includes guidance on some conflict areas, such as bikeways alongside floating bus stops and on-street parking. And in the future, we hope to provide more detail on bikeways alongside areas like ADA parking and pickup drop-off areas. These are among my own personal priorities as we continue work into future years. Even after this is approved, it's a living document. It'll keep changing. Default bikeways are shown here for each street type. Master plans can override these defaults, as can detailed engineering if it's found that something different and hopefully better makes more sense. Most notably, our guide suggests separated bike lanes in downtown and town center areas, which helps separate traffic by giving bicyclists their own spaces to be apart from both motor vehicles and pedestrians. In areas with fewer pedestrians and bicyclists, shared ped bike side paths remain the default, but they are generally proposed to be wider. There are of course some areas, even in those more rural areas, where things like separated bike lanes might still make sense. And as I mentioned, this just lays out the defaults. As part of master plans or engineering, those extra needs can be identified and refined. The bike master plan also added something called breezeways, which I don't think are reflected on what I have on the screen here, but they're basically like bike highways. They're intended to be high quality, high separation, and wide enough to allow side-by-side riding. This guide includes some basic design guidance on these, and I expect, again, that will continue to evolve as we get a better sense of those facilities over time. Right now, we don't really have any built, but we'll get some eventually. Chapter 6 focuses on intersections in quite a lot of detail. I want to highlight a few key sections. I won't go through the whole list on the screen, I think. Access management is something that we'll be diving deeper into soon over the next few months as part of a separate effort. Steve is actually leading that effort, currently ongoing. Mitigating conflicts looks at ways to make intersections safer. This looks at a lot of guidance on, it really centers pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit through intersections. A good example of this centering is that last line at the bottom there. Seeking to eliminate most channelized right turn lanes. Channelized right turn lanes, I think most people on the call know what those are, but the little slip lanes, if you're driving, you just sort of keep right, more or less at-ish speed through an to make a right turn. But as a pedestrian, it's kind of not a pedestrian space. It prioritizes vehicles through there, and it's not ideal. You have to first cross the slip lane before you get to an island and then cross again. We're trying to get rid of most of those as they create potentially dangerous vehicle-pedestrian conflict areas. One important effort included in this guide is the concept of design vehicles and control vehicles. Design vehicles are the largest frequently occurring vehicles, often for us, the SU-30s. Control vehicles are the rare vehicles that may still be expected, which for us is a fire truck. Each street type allows different levels of encroachment as you're crossing over the center line, either approaching or receiving through your turn. At the right are the 4 types of encroachment allowances for design vehicles. That's again design, again, SU-30s. Or box trucks if you're unfamiliar with the SU-30. Each of those ties to specific street types. And at the left, there's a single example showing and allowing full encroachment when it comes to control vehicles, again, fire trucks. This helps to get us away from the longstanding practice of building overly large intersections centered around fire trucks, when in reality a fire truck has greater capability than many vehicles to command the right-of-way and navigate with encroachment. These turning patterns were developed in partnership with our fire staff, and we're glad to have had them as partners in these efforts. In the intersections chapter is this slide, which should hopefully appear in a moment. It's a huge change from where we are today. Today, in many areas, you may not have a protected crossing available to you if you want to cross the street, especially bus riders run into this a lot. You have to choose between either crossing through traffic right where you are, which could be unnerving. Maybe you have to travel 10, 15, or even more minutes in some direction to get to a safer place to cross. And that's annoying. And honestly, people will just tend to take the chances where they are. We can do better. This guide proposes a mixture of maximum and minimum spacings. The minimums on the right side of the columns are spacing between signals, and is generally intended to keep signals from overlapping with each other operationally. We pretty much have had this guidance for a long time. The column on the left is what's much more exciting here. The maximums, they set the guidance for the furthest someone should have to walk, bike, or roll to get to a protected crossing. You'll see in busier downtown and town center areas, we want more crossings closer together. As you get out into the more rural areas, it can still be a bit far, but it's still much closer spacing than where we are today. And our expectation is that in those areas, most people are already going to, by the land use patterns, likely be near those crossings in the first place. And of course, if there's reason to install a protected crossing within those maximums, that's fine. We can still do that. These are guidance that can be overridden as long as you have reason to do so. Chapter 7, we're going to start going much faster now, provides guidance on building green streets, which focuses on vegetation in 7.2 and stormwater management in 7.3. Obviously helps the environment while keeping streets pretty and pleasant places to be. The section largely consolidates and reiterates existing design practices. This includes incorporating stormwater management into right-of-way. We can treat the water on site, helping replenish groundwater, and of course, providing some additional habitat. Chapter 8 focuses on speed management and is organized into 3 sections, which I'll get into in the next couple of slides. Slower speeds is a big focus of this guide, as speed is one of the most pressing issues under Vision Zero. The graphic at the right really highlights how speed affects the driver's field of vision, their ability to stop, and the lethality in event that a motorist strikes a pedestrian. I'll add that these lethality numbers might be increasingly generous, as we're kind of regressing in vehicle design over the past couple of decades, as we allow larger and taller grille heights and bumpers. And of course, speed management and vehicle design go together in one common effort, but only one of those is within the reach of our county to affect. So speed management it is. We generally use 4 different types of speeds: target speed, or target design, posted, and operating speeds. Each sort of leads into the next, and the ultimate goal is for all 4 to eventually be equal. The target speed is basically a master plan speed, and that's what is covered by this guide. It's the ultimate speed that we want motorists to travel at in the lifetime of a master plan. The design speed is what engineering would use, should try to get people to that target speed. Posted is what goes on the signs, which should reflect the design speed and the target speed. And then operating, hopefully following the signs, which is the design, which is the target. And getting at the table here, it all starts with those target speeds. With Vision Zero in mind, the guide sets lower target speeds than we have today across nearly every street type. That's especially pronounced in downtown, town center, and neighborhood areas. And if you've heard of the 20 is Plenty campaign, this draws directly from that. In many areas, state law restricts us. Actually, that may have changed recently. I have to refresh myself on that. But state law has restricted us from posting speeds under 20 miles per hour in many areas. So at the moment, these may be somewhat visionary, and we hope that in coming years, or possibly now, changes to state law will enable us to put these into effect. For this slide, I'll add that the energy here is on lowering speeds. And if there are areas today with lower speeds that we show here, it doesn't mean we're going to go out there and increase them. Just means that you can like other things in this guide, you can still override what is in here as long as there's reason to do so, like it's already slower. That's a good reason. Speed management. So we have those target speeds, and then how do we achieve them? Up to the engineers to design the road so that motorists travel at those speeds, and ideally you shouldn't even have to look at a speed limit sign. The street itself will guide you into driving at the correct speed. That's the hope. This table provides guidance on how to do that. Each street type has tables which list out the things that are by whether they're required, recommended, optional, or not permitted or not applicable. Required among almost every street type is a sense of enclosure, which means designing buildings to be nearer to the right-of-way, providing a tree canopy, providing street parking, and other features which naturally slow down traffic. There's also guidance on other means of managing speeds, like there's road narrowing, such as lanes or the number of lanes or narrowing the lanes themselves. Vertical measures like speed humps, speed tables, raised crosswalks, kind of the not speed bumps. We try to get away from the little bouncy things you find in parking lots. These are more engineered. Horizontal measures like curb extensions, bulb outs, chokers, islands, other stuff to make the road seem narrower. We've used these quite frequently in Montgomery County. Diverters are things you do at usually 4-way intersections to make a pair of 90-degree turns. Chicanes is a personal interest of mine. I've grown up around a lot of chicanes. I think they're fantastic, shifting the road left and right. You'll see that again in just a moment. And surface treatments like using lines or rumble strips across a roadway can make a motorist feel like they're traveling quickly, or perhaps using textured pavements. Recognizing rumble strips, of course, bring noise concerns. That's a whole topic in its own. We have a couple of examples of how, in the guide, of how you might reconstruct, really focused on arterials for slower speeds. The arterials where a disproportionate number of fatal and severe crashes occur by the nature of their size are also the most difficult to slow. This can remain difficult if there's not support for reallocating space to provide for safer configurations, or as many of these corridors are state roads, they aren't formally within our jurisdiction. But master plans are among the key starting points here in identifying where things like you see on the screen here might be the most viable and desirable. Another example. Common among many of these examples are reducing excess pavement, curb extensions, and horizontal treatments like chicanes. Operational needs and available rights-of-way affect how feasible these can be, but as the county shifts its vision toward more urban, pedestrian, bicycle, and transit-oriented growth, these tools can provide some basic ideas on how to get us in that direction. I'm about to go into the final chapter, which isn't quite as meaty. I want to highlight a big part of what Complete Streets seeks to accomplish. A goal here is on creating self-enforcing roadways where people naturally respond to the design of the roadway and travel accordingly. This goes hand in hand with nationwide attention on the role of police and even non-police enforcement. By reducing the need for traffic enforcement in the first place, Complete Streets seeks to reduce these inequitable risks and impacts to the public, especially those at an elevated risk in those situations due to demonstrated biases in enforcement. Chapter 9 is about implementation. The graphic shown here is an excerpt of a larger 2-page graphic showing who maintains what along a typical street. The section includes guidance on prioritization, specifically calling out equity emphasis areas, school zones, and bike ped priority areas as places where higher prioritization should be considered. This chapter includes a 2-page pair of flowcharts that shows how projects can go from conception to construction. The left side of the flowcharts, which I think it's what I have on the screen here, shows public capital projects, and the right side, not on the screen here, shows private development projects. With that, we're pretty much at the end of the document. It's again intended to be a living document, and we're watching a number of other efforts that will likely feed back into future versions of this guide. There's the ongoing access management guidelines, the pedestrian master plan, our general plan called Thrive Montgomery 2050. They've all been sort of built off of our Complete Streets work and will likely themselves feed back into future updates. I also think we can get more robust. There's a lot of topics on my short list, ADA guidance, voting, bus stops and pickup drop-offs, more detail on breezeways. It's a lot of things that I think this could still grow in the future. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Steve for our closing slides, and we'll head into Q&A.
Okay, real quickly, and I'll try to answer some of the questions real briefly. We're headed to County Council review. We hope that's going to take place this summer. We are still working on changes to the draft code legislation to make it it a reality. The code includes an initial translation so that existing street classifications will automatically become complete streets, street types. That would be a temporary fix until the planning board authorizes an update to the functional master plan of highways and transitways, which would likely take place in 2023. And just as sort of as a background, when we were working on this project early on, our consultants spent a lot of time looking at other complete streets plans, including Prince George's County, Alexandria, Dallas, Boston, a bunch of places across the country. And we were also in coordination with SHA as they were developing their context-driven guide. So there's a lot of consistency, not necessarily the exact street terms, but I think certainly in terms of the concepts, and in some cases, even the dimensions, preferred dimensions identified.
Hey, Steve and Andrew, thank you very much. Considering we are running out of time, I think I will copy all the questions in our chat box here and communicate it with you offline and then send those information to our attendees. So with that, thank you everyone being here. I will see you tomorrow for 2 more excellent presentations. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.